Welcome and thank you for joining us for a special edition of our spinal cord injury support group here at Moss McGee Rehabilitation in Center City, Philadelphia. Today, we will be talking about wearable and implantable device-based spinal cord injury research, a discussion for the Philadelphia SCI community. Before we get started, I'm going to ask that everyone put their microphones on mute. There will be time for questions and answers at the end. So I ask that everybody wait to ask any questions until that time. And I want everyone to know that this meeting will be recorded for future viewing. So we begin the discussion with Dr. Mijail Serruya. He is a neurologist and co-director of the Center for Neuro Restoration at Jefferson University. And later we will be joined by Barry Munro, excuse me, and Jared Kerr from the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium at and they will tell us a little bit about that organization and why they're important to those of us with spinal cord injury. So we'll begin with Dr. Serruya. Thank you for coming. And I guess we'll start with what is implantable and wearable based, what is wearable and implantable SCI based research?
Okay.
Start at the beginning, huh?
Yeah, right. So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, Mijail Serruya is my name. I'm a physician scientist here at Jefferson in Philadelphia, working at Jefferson Moss McGee. Thank you all for joining us. And I just have about 20 so slides. It shouldn't take too long. And then if there are questions, you can both answer, ask our other colleagues, as Marie mentioned, can ask them as well as me, and you can follow. You're welcome, of course, to follow up questions anytime. So these are the questions that Marie had sort of to frame this hour. What's the scientific research and what is important? What's happening in wearable and implantable device, especially locally? Considerations if you're thinking of receiving a procedure outside of the scientific community, which my slides aren't going to talk about, but we can sort of talk about freely. How to get involved in spinal cord injury research as a participant. So the Raphael Center is named after the archangel and patron saint of healers. We build wearable and implantable devices, and we focus on movement, pain relief, and cognition. Of course, we need our spinal cords for tons of things, but the laboratory based at Jefferson downtown is focusing on those first two at the moment. It's a multidisciplinary team. Some of the members are actually here on the call. So we have Tatiana Guerrero-David, who's a research occupational therapist, and Michael Traktorchuk, who's a research physical therapist engineering associate. And I just showing this to you just to let you know that when any of you think of participating in a clinical trial, while there's a lot of time, you may have a lot of interaction with the lead study coordinator and maybe a principal investigator who's a doctor or a PhD scientist, it's just to realize that it takes a village. And there's a whole group of people behind the scenes that you may never see, but that are building every component of what you're doing, every form, this, that, and the other. So there's sort of a whole team supporting every session that you're in. So just one or two slides on scientific research and its importance. And again, there's one or two slides. So this comes from the Food and Drug Administration, from the US government. And this slide is just showing you the difference between clinical research and medical treatment. I think a lot of people get confused about what's for each. And I think, unfortunately, spinal cord injury is a little bit behind the ball in terms of other branches of medicine. So for example, if any of you have loved ones with cancer, it's people that have a cancer diagnosis, their doctors and the nurses and the therapists working with them are just much more familiar with research. And they it's just part of the treatment from the get-go, really just makes clear about research and clinical care. And while, actually McGee's actually had a lot of leadership in developing the research, but if you're coming from outside of that, sometimes the doctors, nurses, other people just sort of aren't as tuned in, which is why we're having this discussion. So clinical research is about answering specific questions with volunteers, whereas medical treatment is trying to treat you as an individual. So it's different. The benefit for a research trial is really to help future patients, with the idea being that whatever treatments we have today are from the research of the past, and any treatments of tomorrow is based on the research of today. Whereas when you go see your physiatrist, your OT, PT, et cetera, relate to your spinal cord injury, your urologist, whatever it is, they're trying to help you right this minute. And so you just have to be clear that in clinical research, while you're hoping for benefit for oneself, that it's really an altruistic exercise in helping future people. Clinical research can be paid for by different ways. Here, drug developers, government agencies, it could be from philanthropy. Whereas medical treatment, usually your insurance is paying for it, and sometimes you yourself will pay out of pocket. The time frame will vary on the research protocol. Medical treatment, obviously, if you come to see your doctor, go to the emergency room, you're expecting a decision right then. Whenever you do research, you have to give your own consent. Medical treatment, it's sort of consent is a little bit implied. Like if you come to see the emergency room, you're sort of giving them permission to help you. But if there's certain procedures like a surgery, they will ask you to get consent. And then the assessment may be a little different. In medical treatment, you're sort of assessed depending on what the nurse, the PT, OT, the MD needs. Whereas in the research, there may be very sort of unusual or different kind of assessments. You're protected a little bit differently. So when you go to see your doctor, because let's say you have a pressure ulcer or something, and a wound care nurse is evaluating you or something like that, that provider is guided by state boards, peer reviewed, and sort of just medical consensus. If you're in a trial and let's say you get a pressure ulcer due to, I don't know, an experimental device or something, they're the ethics boards, the institutional review boards of the hospital, which Jefferson Moss McGee has one, as well as things like the FDA. In clinical research, you have to know that if you're participating, it's unproven benefit, right? We're trying to gather data to help future individuals. It may or may not be helping you. Whereas when you go to see the doctor, again, the emergency room, you see a primary care doctor, you're kind of expecting that by that point, they're already safe and effective. When the data gathered in a trial is usually considered confidential. Depending on the informed consent process, they may be able to share information with you as a participant, and that will vary study by study. Whereas your medical treatment is based on knowledge that's in the general public. So if there's a drug or device out there, it has to be, the FDA requires you to share it. And then again, what's released, no one's, your doctors and nurses should not be releasing your medical records over TikTok. And that's sort of, there's HIPAA and laws for that. Whereas for the research stuff, it's going to end up really probably in research papers, sometimes reports to the government. And there's all kinds, I'm not going to really go into this, but as you go from like an idea in someone's head, like, oh, I wish I could, improve this symptom of spinal cord injury or cure this or that, you're going from fundamental science all the way up to, medical products. And what's needed for each is going to be different, which is one reason research is different than clinical care. So what are the trials happening right now in Philly, at least that I'm aware of? So the first, to orient you on implantable and wearable medical stimulation, I want to tell you all that long ago in ancient Rome, people knew that you could take a fish, this is a torpedo ray, that there are fish that generate electricity, electric eel, electric fish, even sharks can generate some electricity. And this was a physician to an ancient Roman emperor. And they actually used those fish as a treatment. So if someone would have a migraine, they like threw a fish on their head, which seems very bizarre. And of course, the fish would freak out and it's probably not doing so well out of the water, but it would generate a powerful electrical discharge, and that would affect the brain and spinal cord of that person. In 2025, if you go to McGee and you get electrical stimulation, thankfully they're not using a live fish, because in the 18th century, Galvani and Galeazzi realized that if you have a battery and you discharge it onto like a frog leg, it will twitch. And so if we move to now, we have all these devices that can be used that are basically, they're all sort of similar in what they're doing. And they have names like TENS, FES, NMES, and they're basically all skin surface electrical stimulation. So you have some sort of battery somewhere or some power source, maybe it's plugged into the wall, and it's generating electrical current that's going from the skin through the skin towards muscles and nerves. And if it's along your back, to your spinal cord, if it's on your head, to the brain, and then back out the skin. And so there's a whole bunch of tools like this. And some of you may have used these either in your clinical care at Moss McGee or maybe at a research trial. And some of them, some of the insurance doesn't tend to cover most of these as take-home products, but often a place like Moss McGee and other facilities will have them, like for the OTPT gym. So what we're doing right now at Jefferson at this moment in 2025 is we have something called RISES, and RISES stands for the Reynolds Innovative Spinal Electrical Stimulation Project. It's funded by a foundation called the Reynolds Foundation by a man named Tim Reynolds, who was a former founder of Jane Street Capital, which was a very successful Wall Street business. Tim himself got in a car accident and became paraplegic. And so he's used some of the financial wealth that he's accrued through good fortune and his decisions to support research at a variety of places, including Kessler Institute outside in New York, and New Jersey, excuse me, as well as here at Jefferson Moss McGee. And this graphic, it sort of simplifies it. We've actually had multiple RISES protocols under this funding. So I'm not talking, this is sort of an overall picture of the general idea, but basically this is for individuals who have chronic spinal cord injury, and they may have a test, like something called the NASCIC, which is sort of quantifying, anyone with spinal cord injury will have undergone this as part of their clinical care. And then they may do something called FES mapping, where you sort of try electrical stimulation at different muscles to sort of see if they respond. And depending on how that looks, if the person if there's evidence that the FES can modulate anything along their body, then they may participate in this trial. And the basic idea of the trial is that we put these electrodes on the skin surface along the back, so along the spinal cord, but nothing penetrating the skin. These are just regular sticker electrodes. And people wear various sensors, and the sensors can record muscle activity and movement. And the idea is that we sort of test the effect of this electrical stimulation. And we actually use something called the Excite from RTI, which is often used in the clinical setting anyway, but we've modified it, and we've had permission from the ethics board to do this, where rather than having the therapist constantly changing the parameters, we're able to sort of set our own programs or even change it dynamically. So if, for example, let's say someone has a cervical spinal cord injury and they can shrug their shoulder, but they can't move their hand, let's say. So this could pick up a tiny little twitch of their shoulder and then use that to stimulate the hands, for example. So that's called RISES, and then there's a variety of tasks you can have people do. And this trial is currently recruiting. Tatiana, as I mentioned, is one of the coordinators, and she's on the call, and I'll give you her contact information in a minute. And the mapping is where we literally map. So we put these stickers that don't look exactly like this, and we want to sort of find out what happens when we apply electrical current. And so we try it at different locations along the body, and then we can try different parameters. Because when you have electricity, there's a lot of choices you can make. And if any of you are investigating online or through word of mouth or other methods about other trials, there are trials all over the world right now happening with this skin surface electrical stimulation. And they have different names. And if you put them on the periphery, if you put them on a muscle and make it contract, that may be called FES and MES. When you put it on the back, sometimes people call it TSCS, which means transcutaneous spinal cord stimulation, but it's all the same idea. It's electrical energy. It goes in the body one place, comes out the other, and you're trying to sort of turn on and off different circuits in the body to sort of see if it can have an effect. So RISES mapping is really just doing that. It's mapping. It's not, again, it's research. The goal is to work towards a future device that people can use to help themselves. But in the current moment, it's just trying to figure out, hey, if we put electricity in someone's body, how does it change them specifically? What's unique about our group compared to some of the others around the world is that when most groups are applying stimulation along the back, they essentially are sort of choosing a location on the back and choosing some parameters. And then they do get to select how much sort of juice they're putting in. But we're being much more careful and precise about how very specific combinations of locations and parameters are going to affect the body, with the idea being that human beings are not like clocks. And so that the same stimulation across people could have totally different effects. And so rather than just sort of guessing and saying, well, I give everybody the same thing and you sort of hope for the best. We actually want to map each person specifically. So this is one example of how it might look. There might be some electrodes along the back, some on someone's hips, and that means electricity will sort of move through the upper part of the spinal cord and through the belly. And we can do all kinds of measurements. So this would be like, this is recording from a person in our trial on this is the activity their muscles are activating when we stimulate. And we can use all kinds of math to sort of figure out what circuits of the spinal cord are turning off and on. To figure out what's going on. And we can sort of say, hey, when we apply the stimulation, let's say this is someone who has an incomplete, thoracic spinal cord injury, and they're not really able to walk too well. They have a little bit of a twitch in their foot. So now we can do an experiment like this and figure out what exactly is the stimulation doing and which one works for them best. Here are some brief video clips. So I'm not showing you people's faces, but they've given permission to share these videos for education, which this includes. So you can see when we turn the stimulation, you're going to see that her posture changes. So she has more postural stability with electricity on. And this person is paraplegic. But when we turn, let's see if I'm having trouble running it. And you can see little sensors are on her leg, and you can see the electrodes on her back. This is someone who has a higher level injury, who has cervical spinal cord injury. And again, we turn the stimulation and we're recording effects. And this is a gentleman, again, who we're trying to augment lower extremity. So there's the contact information, and this is being recorded, and I'm sure Marie can connect to me later. All right, I want to keep going for the sake of time, if I can get through here. This is just a range. Again, I don't have anything identifying here. I've just given the broad age range just to let you know who in the last 2 or 3 years have participated. So these are individuals who may have had, different kinds of trauma to the spinal cord or strokes, and it's all kinds. So there's complete and incomplete, all kinds of levels. The trial is open to everybody. Another trial I want to make you aware of, which we're also collaborating on with our colleague Jay Nair, is they're actually having stimulation with a therapeutic air mixture. It turns out if you change the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide, it's done in a safe way, but you can change it. And apparently, according to Dr. Nair, this will change some of the circuits in the spinal cord. And so they're doing this to sort of see, if it can have a net benefit. So that's another study ongoing. We've had something that some people ask about sometimes at Moss McGee called the neurosleeve. This is a system that sort of is a support to help elevating the arm. So this young man does not have a spinal cord injury. Instead, he had a different neuromuscular condition, but you can see he has muscle loss. And this is a device that's been customized to the shape of his arm. It has a motor. This is not an active trial at this moment, but we do have a waiting list. So if you have a personal interest in having perhaps one day a special brace or support or motorized system built for you, you're certainly welcome to text my mobile or email me, and I will make sure you're on a waiting list. So if and when that's available, we'll be happy to let you know. We are working as best we can on this. And so while we don't have the bandwidth right now in January 2025 to be enrolling people in this trial, again, if you or a loved one is interested, it's important that we know that, because then we'll make sure to develop the device with people with spinal cord injury in mind. There's a study for subacute spinal cord injury, which I'm guessing for you is, most that you are all in the community, so it's not as relevant, but I just want to let you know it is happening. There's an upcoming trial led by Dr. Chanot, who's a urologist, on a drug that helps with, bladder issues in people with spinal cord injury. So this is just telling about all kinds of trials here at Jefferson Moss McGee. Another one that's starting very soon in February is the GRASP release assessment of a network neuroprosthesis device. And so that's a fully implanted device. This is a surgical trial that has muscle stimulators. This is coming out of the Cleveland FES Center, which has been implanting these stimulators in people with spinal cord injury for like 40 years or something, or maybe actually a half a century by now. It's been 50 years. So anyway, we're very lucky that in Philadelphia, we have a site. Dana Johnson is a research physical therapist. That's her contact information if you want to learn more about that. And that's targeting people with cervical spinal cord injury. Although in principle, this technology could be used anywhere along the body. So even if you're not sure whether you qualify, simply letting someone like Dana or myself know that you're interested is helpful, because that may lead us to creating a new trial. For our project here at Jefferson, we are applying to the FDA as we speak to do an implanted version. So we'll have to, you know, I can't tell you more than that because it's up to the FDA to decide what they want. If they give approval, then we'll be able to enroll people in that study. And if you want to learn more, you can contact us. And again, if we have even if you may not qualify right off the bat, simply learning more about it and letting us know of your interest is helpful. One other thing that's happening like fresh off the presses is that we have a surgery neurotechnology survey. So this is a survey you just take on your own. And then if you're willing to, you have like a little Zoom call just with me and the team. And this is we really want to find people who are living with cervical spinal cord injury, quadriplegia, either from complete, incomplete. And this is sort of an interesting survey because the survey itself is a study, right? But what we really want is we want your input on how we should design a trial. And we're specifically thinking about different kind of brain-computer interfaces. And so we basically want we want people who actually are living with this to tell us what they would want, what they do and don't want. So anyway, it's a survey study. You can text my mobile, and then you can email me, and you can fill it out at your own pace. And again, if you're willing to, you can meet with us. And in fact, if you want, you can even meet with the FDA and basically say, yeah, I would put up with that risk, or no, I wouldn't, or I want the device to do X, Y, Z. So the survey has way more details. And of course, you could sign up for the survey and then take a look at it and say, you know what, I'm not interested. With all research, you always have the freedom to sort of walk away. Okay, so I think I've actually taken more than enough time. So I'm just going to really blaze through this and just let you know that there are other trials happening in Philadelphia right now. Shiv at Temple is using smartphones to improve physical activity. Margaret Finley at Drexel has actually several studies to help people with spinal cord injury. And some of these they're home-based. So once you sign up, you do this like virtual reality type thing, and you gotta get coaching. So these are happening now, and you can be recruited now. And I'm going to sort of end with that and just let you know, I know Marie gave a sort of aspirational title of like all wearable and implantable. So there's a lot of things happening in the United States and the world. So I can't tell you all of them, but I think some of our colleagues from the consortium can tell you a little more. So that's yeah. And anyway, if you have questions after this presentation, I'm happy to speak with you. That's my email and that's my mobile. All right, I guess will hand it back to Marie.
So, just for some follow-up questions. So I don't know if you can even get down to these specifics, but what would be like identifying priorities of SCI research with these implantables and wearable devices? So what are they trying to focus on? What's the general focus at this point with this research? Is it movement? Is it?
So there's the trial we're doing right now at Jeff Moss McGee, and then there are other trials all over the place, including at Kessler and sites all over the United States and the world. So most of these trials are focusing on trying to restore movement. And the movement can be, just like one spinal level, so to speak. Someone who's C5 now gets some C6 abilities. Sometimes it could be more significant. But one of the goals is to try to work some sort of movement, voluntary movement restoration. Some of it can be to reduce spasticity. Some of the trials are about reducing pain, so chronic neuropathic pain. And of course, pain in spinal cord injury is almost always multifactorial. So there may be some signals of actual tissue injury. Some of it's because the signals are scrambled, and some of it is because of changes in the brain. There are currently we were just starting to look at this, but there are also clinical trials on autonomic function. So, after a spinal cord injury, many people may have changes in their autonomic nervous system, so their blood pressure regulation. So we've actually just started to look at that in our current RISES mapping trial to say, hey, do we have the ability to turn up the blood pressure, with the idea being that, some people get brain fog, but because they can't think clearly, have low energy, and it turns out their blood pressure is just not high enough to keep their brain happy. And we want to see if electricity could modify it. There are trials, again, we're not doing it at Jefferson, but there are other trials which are looking at bowel and bladder function and sexual function. Some of those are external stimulator. Some actually like will put nerves in other parts of the body, like in your leg or something, to drive some of the bowel bladder nerves. So pretty much almost any aspect of that's affected by spinal cord injury, there's a trial somewhere. But in terms of what we're focusing on in my team at Jeff Moss McGee downtown, we're mostly looking at movement primarily, but also pain relief and some autonomic function. That's sort of what we're mapping.
Mhm. Okay. And so up until this point, can you tell us what kind of progress has been made with these devices? Like with function or with movement or bowel and bladder? I know. I
Yeah.
know. It's a
So it's a great question, and there's a lot of different protocols out there. I mean, I think so functional electrical stimulation, meaning you put electricity on someone's muscles, that's standard of care. And so many of you on this Zoom, probably somewhere along the way, a physical therapist or an occupational therapist tried to apply current to see if they could help with your hand movement or get on an exercise bike. That's standard of care. That's already standard of care. So in terms of putting electrodes now along your back and along your head, some places are actually doing this clinically already, meaning they're just saying, we don't want to wait for research studies to be published. We don't want to wait. And they're just throwing these on people. It's the same exact electrodes they put on your legs or your arm. They're just putting it in a different place. Now, are they having, how big of an effect are they? Well, it's still not standard clinical care. That's why not everyone is doing it, because they don't teaching in the OT-PT schools yet, because it's research now. But in terms of what research has shown, Marie, it's really, the range is pretty huge, right? So you're going to see things in the New York Times where certain teams are reporting things like, the kind of the dream of someone who's wheelchair bound, who's suddenly walking. So are such cases? Yes, there are such cases, but the majority of the studies are not quite so dramatic. It's more that people are getting a more modest benefit. For example, their walking is if they're able to walk, their walking is more stable. If they're in a wheelchair, they have a lot more trunk stability. If they're using their arm, they may get a little bit more dexterity. So the benefits so far overall, and this is a very broad generalization, are that there are some modest benefits, and there seems to be sort of these outliers where there are some people who have like these dramatic benefits, and there are some who just don't seem to respond to anything they're trying. And that's why I personally have chosen to work on mapping, because I think each person is so different that rather than just winging it and saying, hey, and by the way, this is how we started. Like 3 years ago, if you'd asked me, we actually were at McGee Riverfront, and that's what we did. We actually put the electrodes on and we just chose a spot. And we had people doing all kinds of intensive repetitive therapy with their physical and occupational therapists. And our results weren't so, I mean, they didn't hurt anybody, but they weren't having tremendous benefit. And I saw how variable it was across people. And I said, this is crazy. Why should we just throw things at the wall and just guess? What really matters is how does an individual respond? But in terms of globally, I mean, there's a lot of interest in it. There's probably 5 to 10 groups around the world that are doing a lot of implantable trials. So that's like Miami and the Mayo Clinic and Kentucky and now Kessler. But nearly every major city in the planet is doing transcutaneous, because sticker electrode, I mean, you can get a stimulator for like $300. So just about any occupational physical therapist or scientist can do this. I hope I'm answering your question. And of course I welcome Barry, Jared, Ian, if they can give maybe a more nuanced reply to that question. I don't know.
Well, just a real quick follow-up to that. So what about bowel and bladder and that kind of function? Is there any indication that is responding to this type of research?
Yeah, well, yes, there is a lot. So as with trying to restore voluntary control of the legs or trunk or hands, etc. There is, as I said, the research shows a huge range. There's in certain kinds of spinal cord injury, in certain people, there can be benefits. of stimulation. And in Europe, for whatever reason, they do a lot more of this posterior tibial nerve stimulation that seems to benefit bowel and bladder function in certain individuals. I'm not entirely sure whether there's not as much research in the United States on that, but people have, it's an area of active investigation. And if you go to the websites, clinicaltrials.gov, SCItrials.org, if you type bowel bladder, you're going to find a lot of trials. People are looking at this pretty intensively, and they're using and as last I checked, they're putting electrodes everywhere. So some are non-invasive. You just put it on your skin, on your leg skin, on your back skin. And there are trials which are implantable systems.
So this will be my last question before I punt it over to Barry and Jared. Just so what happens when somebody elects to drop out of a research when you're in the middle of it? What does that do to your numbers? Or to your data, I should say.
So two things. One is, first of all, it happens and it's totally fine. And there should be never any negative consequence to a person to leaving a trial. You get your clinical care as you always do. And so that's very important. We respect people's autonomy to do, if they want to stop, they don't have to give any explanation. Now, the team may also discontinue a person for no reason, and you definitely can't take that personally. It could be they have low on staff or something. But in terms of the data, it really depends on the specific trial. Sometimes that person's data is kind of a loss. Like you can't, because they didn't complete it, you don't have an end of study outcome measure, and so you may not be able to learn much from it, and that's a shame, and it happens, it happens. Other times, like for example, in our trial, every single session we learn, because we're recording directly from the body and we're recording muscle signals. Every single visit we're learning something. So even if it was like, let's say there was like 6 visits and someone only came to 1 visit, we would still learn a ton from 1 visit. Would we? Obviously, the consent is we would prefer them to go through it, but so it really depends on the particular trial. Some trials, there's data that's being gathered that can be meaningfully analyzed as you go along, and others really make no sense. And in fact, that's one reason we changed our trial entirely. Meaning, a few years ago, we had people in the trial for 3 months, and unless you were in it for 3 months, when people did sort of have to leave halfway through, that data was sort of lost. We really couldn't make any use of it, and I personally thought it was sort of a silly trial design. So I changed it because I wanted to learn things as we went. So that it just sort of depends on the trial. But the other point of that I want to emphasize is that everyone's opinion is valuable. So when they do a trial, like, I don't know, like a COVID vaccine or some new drug for your heart disease or whatever, it doesn't matter what you're thinking. As long as you give consent, the drug's just going to do its thing. But with these things, when you're talking about devices that have to do with your movement or your bowel bladder function or your autonomic or your pain relief, like you're a person, you have a brain, you have a mind, like you can contribute to the process. Like there's insights that a participant's going to have that are totally different. And so even if someone is only in a trial for 1 session, their feedback could completely change the course of that research. And that could have an impact in creating a totally new therapy in the future. And so every single person's contribution, every step along the way is very, very valuable. And I think that's something that's unique to this kind of research, but I think it's very, very important to keep in mind that if you participate in this kind of research, you're not like this passive blob just sort of taking a drug and hoping for the best. Like, you're expected to be a partner, and that means, it can be more of a challenge, but it also could be more exciting because the team is really paying attention to what a person has to say and really considering you as a valued member of the team.
Good. All right. I'm hesitant. I'm just concerned about time. Let me, you know what, Barry, why don't we switch over to you? Dr.
Sounds great.
Sorry, yeah. I guess, can you unshare your screen so then we can?
So Gabby, if you can hop in and share, there she is. Perfect.
And then we'll kind of speed through and open up to questions and like.
Sounds great. Thank you, Marie. Thanks everybody for having us. And I'll give a brief overview of who we are and what we're up to, and then my colleague Jared, Vice President of NASCIC, will talk more specifically about clinical trials and what to look for. And all we wanted to do, and I'm just going to say this from the very beginning, it's really to equip us to make great decisions and to have input on all things research. And that's sort of where we're going to go with this today. And there was two great things, Dr. Serruya. Thank you very much for your presentation that you said. He used the word partner and he used the word design. And those are things that we'll talk about in the role that we play as an organization. So I thought I'd just share that with you. At the very beginning, Dr. Serruya said that we're a little behind when it comes to SCI research as an as a condition. Compare ourselves to Parkinson's, MS, maybe other neurological conditions where they've been more involved in as much, maybe more active research, and we're only new in the scheme of things in the last, say, 20 years as organizations really getting into clinical studies. And because of that, our role in engagement, meaning our input on research, has been lacking. And that's really the beginning of how NASCIC was formed. So back in 2016, there was a conference in Vancouver, Canada, where they invited a lot of the research field, talking about where's research going. And then they invited people with lived experience to attend, but really just to be in the sidelines. And it was at that point we realized that they don't know really what we know, and there's a lot we can do to be part of this. And we felt, well, we could sit and complain about it, or instead we decided to form what is now the North American SCI Consortium. And it was really bringing together all the community-based organizations that are involved in care, in research, services. So you're talking United Spinal, PVA chapters, you're talking SCI chapters in Canada, Reeve, you're talking Unite to Fight Paralysis. All of us have some common goals. So that's what brought us together. And then we were invited in 2019 to speak at the NIH meeting. And that's when they're looking at the next decade of research. It's hard to believe we're halfway there now. I can't believe that. And in that meeting, it's called A Decade of Disruption. And it was the first time that they invited people with lived experience to actually speak to an auditorium full of researchers. And it's hard to believe that it took that long for us to give our input on what we think and where we think research is going. What came out of that meeting, and then after speaking to our membership going into that meeting, was that we as people with lived experience in general felt that we were disconnected with research, that we don't have a lot of input, that we weren't really guiding research. It was the researchers deciding, well, this is what we think is important to you. And we said, well, you're not really necessarily reflecting our priorities. And more importantly, we weren't involved in the research setting, like other conditions. And I always refer back to our friends with breast cancer that, over 3 decades ago, they were at the table and said, we want to be involved in design. And we want you to understand what our priorities were and how you're going to do things. Because guess what? We're raising hundreds of millions of dollars and we don't have a seat at the table. And that's just not right. And so they were the first to prove and go forward in what we call advocacy in research. And so that's what a bit of our mantra and what SCI research engagement really means, and really what NASCIC first decided to get involved with. So we go to the next slide, you just see a little bit on the organization. This is who we are, just a summary of what I just said. And it was really in 2017 in Minneapolis, we decided this is what we're going to do. And then from that point on, we went on in 2018 in Miami at the Working to Walk conference. That was the birth of NASCIC. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see this is what we represent. It's people from all over North America. And our membership is really in 3 tiers. One is community-based organization. 2 is what we call partners. These are organizations that the academic institutions, private sector, those groups that clearly are really partners in what we do in research, and we wanted them at the table. And then the 3rd tier is really individuals. I always like to call them free agents. These are people with lived experience that just want to be part of what we do. They can still obviously be part of their organizations locally, just like your group, Marie. Anybody can be part of it. And it's frankly, it's a free membership, and we always encourage people to be involved. And our mission is really simple. It's to drive unified achievements in research, care, cure, and policy by fostering collaboration across the spinal cord injury community. And we always like to think that we're a conduit of collaboration. We like to think that where we can bring everybody together on common issues, because that doesn't exist in the SCI world except for what we're doing. And so we'd like to, and really our membership consists of everybody, a cross section in our community throughout North America. And frankly, your people, our people, all of us together dictates what NASCIC would do next. And so we just listen to the community and the membership to drive what we're going to do. So if we go to the next slide, that's just kind of an overview of what I just said. And by the way, my understanding, people will get this recording, they can see this deck, so they can have this to go back and look at and understand what we do. And it's always important to, one part of the mission that I can't reiterate enough is we're identifying gaps where we see something in policy or in an area of what we're doing. If there's a gap and nobody else will fill it, and then that's what we'll do. We try to bring that together, but we only do that with you, the members. We don't try to pretend that we know better. We make sure that everything we do is dictated by the membership that way. And so the next slide, this gets us into sort of where we've planted our one flag when it comes to clinical study and participation. And I'm going to ask my colleague Jared to handle the next section of slides in dealing with clinical studies. Jared is the vice president of NASCIC and runs our project review committee, which deals specifically with questions and clinical studies and how people participate. The one thing I did want to say before I sign off to the end is we try to provide what we call informed hope, in that research is complicated, but it doesn't have to be. And we're trying to build that capacity. And I'll speak to our tools later on in the presentation, but this is ours. It's not theirs, it's ours. It's our future, it's our bodies, it's our function. We have a vested interest in this, but to be a very positive and a great contributor to research, I think we need to be educated to a certain degree to understand the process. So that's what we're doing here. And I'll just maybe move over to Jared and let him go from there, but thanks.
Thanks, Barry. So we just got a few minutes here. Just real quick. So my background's in mechanical engineering, and when I broke my back in 2014, I'm a para-Asia complete. I thought, where can I get the latest and the greatest research? And I moved to Miami to be close to the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis, which has a lot of great research. And I wasn't able to get into some of the trials that I wanted to, but I was able to participate in some clinical trials. So I do have some background knowledge in that. And one of the things that we wanted to bring up, given what has already been pointed out, well, 64% of all clinical trial research in the spinal cord injury community fails, doesn't go all the way to completion, simply because of people dropping out. And what we found is that the trial, to the doctor's point, wasn't designed properly, in the sense that it wasn't designed for us. And so one of the things NASCIC has taken on, nothing for us without us. And if you make a trial that's going to cause that is physically demanding, there better be some pretty great rewards to get us out of bed for it every day, right? So we factor all of that in. And then another thing we look at on the project review committee side when we're reviewing a trial is we look at the priorities. Obviously, we'd all like to be up walking around climbing mountains again, but we've also done the research to know from our community that that's not what's the most important. It might be the most important in the weeks following, but after a year or two, you realize quickly that the most important thing is bowel, bladder, pain management, hand function, dexterity, independence, mobility. And so we really try to hone in on that, those particular studies in particular to support them. And we have plenty of room for additional help and support from for people. So if you want to get involved, please come and join us as we fight the good fight. And so a couple of things for people who might not be aware. We want to be careful. Like if you go on clinicaltrials.gov, there's a lot of good studies, but there's also a lot of not good studies. And what's a not good study? A study that requires you to pay $50,000 and travel to another country. that doesn't maybe have the right protocols in place. I was looking at a study that the one that was at the time that was great was the stem cell. It was being not great. It was being commercialized or marketed. It had Mel Gibson in it, and it was down in Panama, and it was going to be $50,000 to $75,000. Which, if you're ever going to spend the money, you'd want to spend it on your health during a tragedy. But what you don't want to do, right, is to waste it on something that may cause more harm than good. Which there was a couple of reported. Don't quote me on this, but there was a couple of reported from my recollection of people who had gotten the cell treatment and actually ended up with more pain. So there's a reason why we follow certain protocols, and the FDA follows certain protocols in our country. And so I really encourage you to be mindful of that when you're doing your research on which trials you're going to participate in. We're a big fan of SCItrials.org. SCItrials.org. It's very user-friendly and will give you a good list of the trials that are in your area. But we still have lots of work to do as a research community to get more of these trials in more locations to make it more accessible for people to participate. Next slide. So I pretty much just covered some of that stuff, what to be aware of when you're looking at clinical trials and what the side effects are and what to consider. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit about the risks of unapproved trials and medical tourism. That's the technical word for what I was explaining about. If you have to travel somewhere to another country and they're wanting you to pay for it, those are some red flags. Not to say that they might not be good, but you want to do your own research for sure. And the other thing too is to be mindful of is that when you do get one of these, if you participated in one of these trials or any trial, that oftentimes, more often than not, will preclude you or eliminate you from participating in a future trial. So you want to be mindful of, okay, is this the one for me? Is this the one I want to put my eggs in? This is the one that even if it fails, I will feel good about the fact that I contributed to research in this field for future generations. So that's also important to realize that you might not get any benefit, and it could actually make things worse. It's a real thing. I think that the transcutaneous stimulators, everything that I've seen, and the people that I've worked with have been very positive. There haven't been any people who have complained about not seeing results, or if they didn't see results, it being worse than how they started. So I feel like particularly in the world of the US and Canada, where we've seen trials that we've supported, there have been good benefits and very few issues in terms of having worse conditions after the fact. But it's always good to have that, to be aware of that as you move forward and making your decision. And so transcutaneous, anything that's not being inserted inside of you or a surgical implant, for the obvious reasons, are going to have more things to consider when you're making an informed decision. And may not, you may be able to do a transcutaneous study and then you wait a year and you're able to do another one or something like along those lines. Whereas if you had an implant, that could be a whole elimination for decades until something gets actually approved by the FDA. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're not going to go through all of these different questions. You can take a closer look, but this kind of gives you a framework of things you want to bring to the person who's the investigator who's recruiting for your study, for the study you're considering. These are some basic questions to ask. There's a lot of them. There's obviously safety and the feasibility, but also the protocol. You want to really get into the protocol to see if it's something you can do and you're willing to do. And to the doctor's point, if you drop out, it's not a problem. You can try it out and drop out. It's not a problem. No one's gonna. It's not. Doesn't go against your clinical trial resume or anything like that. And you will learn along the way. I really encourage you to have that frame of mind that you're being educated, because as you're educated, you just become a wealth of information for the next person. And you can really pass this on. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I'm here. I know that's why Barry's here. I know that's why Ian's here. We're compelled, after what we've been privileged to learn, to share it with others and to engage in our community. Next slide, please. Oh, we out of time? I got a message. Still good. Okay, so this is where you can go to find the clinical trials that we were talking about, SCItrials.org. Next slide, please.
Do you want, Marie, do you want us to wind up for your hour?
Well, I'm trying to, you know what, some of the researchers might have to go, so that are on the call. So I want to quick, if you guys are open to quick, open it up to questions, and then
Sure. Just
go from
one more.
there. And go ahead, you go.
Yeah, just one more thing I want to put in. So we have a course that we created. It's called the SCIRAC, the Spinal Cord Injury Research Advocacy course. Highly, highly, highly recommend it, not just for people with the injury, but also researchers, anyone who wants to learn how to communicate with people on both sides of the aisle, as well as learn about how injuries happen and what happens to the basic biology of the course. So that's a free course. You just have to become a member, which is also free. And you can do that at NASCIC.org or right there. All right, thanks.
So important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And now people can ask questions if you want to turn your mic on. In the chat, there is a question about, has anybody heard of Veredo Neuro Clinic? And their epidural stimulation treatment. It's sounding suspicious.
Yeah. So Dr. Matthias, who's a spine and functional neurosurgeon, he's the one who had just to sign off. But we can relay this question to him. But I investigated this briefly, and I think the concern is something that, just to what Jared Kerr just said, the Veredo Neuro website seems to make a lot of promises without, it's actually the boundary between what's research and clinical care, just to me, and I'm a clinician, of course I have my own medical conditions, so I know what it's like to be a patient too. I find it incredibly confusing, and the fact that I'm so confused is itself a red flag. So, you know, my impression is that they are putting in spinal cord stimulators for the purposes of restoring function in spinal cord injury. And let's be very honest and transparent here. In January 2025, the FDA and its European and Australian and other national counterparts have not approved spinal cord stimulation as an evidence-based treatment that is safe and effective for people with spinal cord injury for anything except in certain well-chosen individuals who have certain very particular kinds of chronic pain. Spinal cord stimulators may be appropriate. And if it's an incomplete, in certain very, very rare cases, it may be for certain aspects of bladder function. But in terms of like what the website looks like it's talking about, which is people getting up out of their wheelchair, walking on walkers, that is not standard of care. So if the purpose of Veredo Neuro is to offer a clinical service, that is something not available in the United States. There's no surgery team, rehab team. It's just not, the FDA has not approved that. So I don't exactly know if it's a research study, which it doesn't look like they're setting as a research. In terms of using a spinal cord stimulator for research, well, of course, we're trying to do one of those trials, and there's teams in Switzerland and France and in Miami, all over the place, that are using a variety of implants in the nervous system. And I think if the question about Veredo Neuro is, you know, is there any merit? Is there any scientific merit to looking at an implantable stimulator to help with spinal cord functioning? There certainly is. That's why the NIH and organizations all over the planet are funding it and trying to figure it out. But is it standard of care? It is not. We hope that there will be one day, but right now it's not.
Dr.
Anyway,
Serruya,
yeah.
since you are saying that about the FDA not approving, I believe you're talking about implantables for
Yeah.
epidural stim.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can say to address about the FDA's recent approval of transcutaneous?
Well, I'm not aware of a particular recent approval, but I think, as I said before, and maybe it's like Spine X or something. I don't know. I mean, maybe things are happening faster than I even.
It was from the ARC study.
Oh yeah. So I think that's Spine X or Onward. So I'd have
It
to
is
look.
Onward.
Yeah. So I'd have to look at their specific. So the Onward study. Actually, Jefferson downtown Magee Riverfront was the site for the ARC study.
Yes, we were.
And I played a role in that because 7 years ago when it was an idea in someone's head, I said you got to include us, and I introduced somebody to somebody, and finally made their way to you, Mary. So at last I don't know the details of that particular one, but I know that in general, it's intended to be used as coupled to rehabilitation. So you basically putting the stickers on the back and then doing this kind of intensive rehabilitation. And if the FDA recently approved it, that means that the ARC final trial showed enough evidence that it was better than just sham stimulation, meaning fake stim, that it actually was really doing something when it was coupled. So that's great news. I wasn't aware of that recent thing, but
I think I just wanted to make sure that people understood FDA clearance for on the surface of the skin versus implantables. Very different story.
So, well, I would go even further than that. There could be two different implants and two different skin surface things.
Right.
And the FDA could improve one or the other. I mean, you think about it for any other medicine, right? Or any other device. There can be two pharmaceuticals, one which gets approved and one which seems very similar, but it doesn't have good data. So I think with any new thing that you're considering putting on your body, spending your time, and certainly if it's your money, if it's an out-of-pocket thing, you want to clarify, is this approved? Is it not approved? Is this clinical care? Is it research? And unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure that the education, the free course that Jared Kerr just mentioned, will certainly walk you through how to think about those questions for research. And I imagine that the NASCIC and other websites have resources to help you sort of think about the most recent approved what clinical care. But you have to definitely go through that checklist. Is this a clinical research trial that's asking an investigational question, or is this being offered as clinical care? If it's being offered as clinical care, i.e. it's going to help me in the short term, and there's safety and efficacy data, then the questions are, is it FDA approved? Does insurance cover it? What are the costs involved? And I mean, and ask just like you guys are asking these questions. Just keep asking until you find the answer.
And the other thing about FDA approval is it doesn't automatically equate with insurance coverage.
No.
That's a separate whole question for people.
Yep.
Just to educate people again to be good consumers. So
that's right.
Thank you.
And this is where the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium comes into play with, the questionnaires, the education, and making sure you're doing something that's going to be good for either you, the process, to get us to the next step. And trying to sort through all of that information. I don't know if Barry and Jared have anything else to add to that, but.
Yes, correct. We do work with certain on the company side of some big names that you have all heard of before, but we've signed NDAs, so I don't know to what degree we can talk about it. But yes, that's one of the things that when they come to us, we make sure we go through we have a project review committee of 10 people. They look at what they're proposing, we review it, and we make sure that they have us at best in interest, our interest, at heart. And we really encourage them to create a community advisory board, which would be people with lived experience, people like us. And then they sit in on, quarterly meetings, weekly meetings, whatever they want, to inform how to design the study and to look at things like, for instance, I'll give an example. One was a brain chip implant company. And, we brought to the table, well, what happens if you go out of business? Now what? Because that's happened in the past. And the person's stuck with this brain chip and they need to get it updated software wise or removed even. And so, they're looking at creating a separate funding for that, just specifically for that in the event of something were to happen. So yeah, it's important to be thinking about all of these ideas and topics.
Right, and turning to the the North American Consortium to educate yourself so that you can kind of decipher through all of this. Any other questions for Dr. Serruya?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. How is regulation, you talk about the FDA and all that, how is regulation related to the study so much? Some things I hear that some regulations are going to be pulled back. And you talked about, unregulated studies that could be more dangerous, but also, from what I hear, what I listen to different things is that they have the ability to do some of this stuff to really, really do something to help us move and stuff. But regulations prevent it from being put into place and into action. So do you foresee with some drop back of regulations in the near future that'll help with these studies?
That's a really great question. I don't think it has a simple answer. I totally hear what you're saying. So, and first of all, I don't know what will happen to regulations. I think that the FDA has a kind of schizophrenic or self-contradictory role. When it was founded like over a century ago, and that it was founded because of, there was all kinds of food poisoning problems. And they said, well, maybe we ought to regulate this rather than letting people eat this poisoned food. The FDA's job is contradictory. They have safety and efficacy. So safety, they want to make sure that every time you go to the doctor, if you get a drug, a device, this, that, the other, that it's not going to make you worse. Or not going to hurt you and cause irreversible damage. And so if you just have your safety hat on, you just won't approve anything, because the easiest thing to do is take no risk. But Congress has required the FDA to also have efficacy, meaning it does have to make new technologies, new drugs, new devices available for those who can benefit. So it has it's been built from the beginning over 100 years to basically have to do these two opposed things, which is we've got to get new treatments to people and make it available for them, but we have to do it safely. And so what that ends up meaning is that it comes down to individual doctors, scientists, therapists, and as Jared said, people with lived experience who can be on advisory boards, and it could be at a company, it can be in an academic setting, who they have a voice at that table, so that because the regulations they're just laws, and someone has to interpret them. And so people at the FDA, and then at each hospital, like at Jeff Moss McGee, there's the Jefferson Ethics Board Review Panel, and there's one at any, Penn, Temple, CHOP, everyone has one. And those can also be a place where people from the community with lived experience may sometimes, play a role. So I think there are the laws, and then there's how they're interpreted. I have no idea if how the regulations will change. I think in general, there's a consensus of people of all kinds of political backgrounds, from Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, you name it. I think there's a general consensus that everyone wants things that are gonna get new treatments to people as soon as possible, but make sure that they're safe, so that if you get something, it's not gonna harm you. But there may be, I'm sure there may be differences of our elected leaders on how to balance that. But I don't think there's any one simple answer, and I certainly can't predict what's going to happen. What I can say is, given that you asked that question, I want you to be aware that you can have a direct voice. So it sounds like NASCIC, from what Jared and Barry just said. I would say, you can play a role. You could maybe play a bigger role than you even realize as just an individual, joining some Zoom calls and telling regulators yourself and saying, hey, this is a technology that interests me. The FDA, every time I've talked to FDA people, they're like, we value lived experience. We value lived. So call their bluff. Say, okay, if you value this so much, this technology, I heard about this stimulator. It's available in wherever. Tell me in your own words, look me in the eye and explain to me why is or isn't it available in a trial or as a clinical product here in the United States? I mean, our taxpayer money is paying for them, so they're obligated to answer those questions. So I think it's a great question. I hope that's the best answer I can give you right now, except to say keep asking that. That's a good question.
I want to jump in just really briefly, Maria. That was a fantastic question, and it kind of encapsulates the whole hour in terms of you're making a personal decision to get involved in research and getting into a study. Be aware that there is this sort of accepted belief, and I've been injured for 37 years, where we're over-regulated, and really the answer is somewhere else that's really niche-y, and especially with social media now, that FDA is too hard, but I'm going to go to Peru and get shark fin installed, a cartilage to help me here. No, I'm going to go to Russia back before the Iron Curtain, because I remember those days, because for some reason they have the answer. No, better yet, let's go to Beijing and get stem cells, because they're not regulated by the FDA. They must have the answer. Be very careful of that. But Dr. Serruya was dead on. And in fact, we're actually involved in right now in a process working with FDA, and stay tuned for that we're actually going to be making submissions. It's called the PFDD, and it's a formal process that's designed to make sure that the community is represented, that our priorities are reflective in terms of what they decide to approve or not approve. And in our case, especially in spinal cord injury. But that was a fantastic question. And I think, Dr. Serruya, you answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. And, the concern is some of these regulations, the second part of that question would be the people investing in this, that they're not investing because of the regulations and the cost of them, is one of fear that I think we all have.
Again, game on. Keep use your voice. The examples that Barry just gave. I thought about it a lot. Like, if certain technologies are to be developed for certain conditions, why isn't it for this one? And how can you change regulations, and how can citizens have their voice so we can change that? I think things are starting to change. I think, I mean, look, the history that Barry just gave of NASCIC. I mean, it's a relatively young organization, right? So I mean, I think and think about the progress this has made for people with cancer or HIV, things like that. I mean, they were working on this a long time. So this community is like catching up with the consortium, and even a Zoom like this. This Zoom wouldn't have happened even 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So I think the questions you just asked are going to be more and more compelling, and there's going to be more listening ears, I think.
Yes, and I thank Maria for setting this up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
I'm sorry. There's one more question, then we'll circle back. But I'm not sure if Dr. Serruya has enough time to.
That's okay. If somebody else has a question, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I can hang on for a little more. Yeah.
Just one more question. Okay. Arturo?
Yes.
Can you, please, you have the board. Give it.
Yes. The only question I have is, I've been disabled for like 39 years. Would that disqualify me for any studies or anything because of my long-term disability?
So if you're asking me, I would say it wouldn't disqualify you from the study, our current RISES mapping study, and that really depends on each trial. So if you go to the SCItrials.org that Barry and Jared mentioned, it will tell you, it will be in there. That SCItrials.org. If you type your zip code, for example, and your spinal level or whatever, it will pull up trials, and they will usually say how long after the trial. And you know what? If it's not clear, there should be a study contact, and you should just contact that person. I mean, I've had my own medical conditions. I go to clinical trials, and even as a doctor, sometimes I can't make head or tail of these websites. But almost always, not always, but almost always, there's a contact person, a phone number, an email. I don't know about you, but I'm like, well, if they gave it to me, I'm going to use it. And then you contact them and you say, hey, like what you just said, I'm 39 years, whatever. This is my level. Do I qualify for your study? And get a clear answer in case the website's not clear. But again, for our trial, it doesn't matter whether it's been 1 year or 100 years. I mean, if the person meets the other criteria, I mean, they're able to get to the appointments and answer our questions, then it so it really depends. There may be trials that because your disability has been that long, you might not qualify for. It might be related to your age. Some are, could be due to some the spinal level or whatever. But there's certainly, I can tell you for certain, our trial, and I'm for certain that there are other trials that don't have an expiration date based on years of disability, but they may be related to other things, right? So like what your MRI looks like or what meds you're on. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. This has been huge. Barry and Jared, I think since we didn't get through all of the slides specifically, I've been already emailed twice, if you could share that. And
we'll get that to you. Yep.
Great. So if anybody else has doesn't have any other questions, I think we'll sign off.
And I just want to end again. I want to thank Marie for putting this together. Thank Barry and Jared for what they said. I want to thank all of you for attending, and I want to just continue my invitation. I'll send my slide set also to Marie. Please feel free to email me, even text my mobile. It is my personal mobile number, so like if you text me at like 2 a.m. on Saturday, I'm not going to get back to you right away. But I will do my best, my very human best, to kind of get back to you, answer your question. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to do everything I can to connect you to. I know most about the Philadelphia trials. I don't, beyond Philly, I'm not sure. And I encourage you to use the SCI trials. And so again, I want to thank you all and just reiterate that offer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Misha.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Mijail, and thank you, Jared. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks, everybody. It was great to have you. And thank you, Doctor. Your passion's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Marie.
Thank you all.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.